There is a difference between weakness and restraint. Do not confuse the two. Weakness is when you cannot strike back. Mercy is when you can, but you choose not to. There is a kind of power that shouts, that demands attention, that proves itself by force. And then there is a higher power, a disciplined, controlled, unshakable strength that stands steady, looks at the offense, measures the damage, feels the sting, and still says, I will not retaliate. That is not frailty. That is not fear. That is mastery. Mercy is strength under control. It is the judge who has the authority to sentence, yet searches for redemption. It is the leader who has the power to crush opposition, yet chooses to correct with compassion. It is the parent who could respond in anger, yet answers with wisdom. It is the individual who has every right to say, You hurt me, and yet declares, I will not let this hurt define me. Understand this, anyone can react, anyone can explode, anyone can return insult for insult. That requires no discipline. That requires no character, but to stand in the heat of offense, to feel the surge of emotion rising within you, and to command your spirit to remain steady. That is strength of the highest order. Mercy does not mean you ignore the wrong. It does not mean you pretend the wound did not happen. Mercy looks directly at injustice and says, I see it clearly. But instead of allowing anger to take the throne, mercy keeps authority over emotion. That is control. And control is power. The world celebrates domination. It applauds those who win arguments, who silence critics, who overpower their enemies. But true greatness is not measured by how many people you can defeat. It is measured by how much power you can govern within yourself. Because the hardest person to rule is you. Mercy says, I refuse to be ruled by my anger. I refuse to let bitterness dictate my decisions. I refuse to allow revenge to poison my future. When you choose mercy, you are not surrendering your power. You are proving you have it. Think about that. The person who lashes out is controlled by emotion. The person who responds with mercy is controlled by conviction. One is driven by impulse, the other is directed by purpose. Mercy is not passive, it is intentional. It is deliberate. It is the conscious decision to rise above instinct and operate at a higher level of character. And when you live that way, when you operate in mercy, you walk with a quiet authority. You do not need to shout. You do not need to threaten. You do not need to prove yourself. Your restraint speaks louder than retaliation ever could. That is strength under control, that there comes a moment when justice rises to its feet. The evidence has been presented. The truth has been exposed. The mistake cannot be hidden. The failure cannot be denied. The verdict seems inevitable. Consequences are lining up at the door. And just when the weight of judgment is about to fall, mercy steps in. Not to deny the truth, not to erase the offense, but to interrupt the finality of destruction. Mercy does not argue with justice, it fulfills it with hope. Understand this clearly. Justice says you did it. Mercy says you can rise from it. Justice says there is a cost. Mercy says there is a future. Justice closes the case. Mercy opens a new chapter. There are people walking this earth today who should have been defined forever by their worst mistake. One wrong decision, one failure, one season of weakness. By every human calculation, their story should have ended in disgrace. But mercy interrupted the verdict. Mercy stepped into the courtroom of their life and declared, "This is not the end. That is power." Because judgment alone creates fear. And fear may control behavior for a moment, but it cannot transform a heart. Mercy, however, reaches deeper. Mercy says, I see what you've done, but I also see what you can become. And that changes everything. Mercy creates space between the offense and the outcome. It gives room to breathe, room to reflect, room to repent, room to rebuild. Without mercy, failure becomes a prison sentence. With mercy, failure becomes a lesson. There is a world of difference between punishment that destroys and correction that restores. Mercy interrupts judgment not to weaken accountability, but to strengthen redemption. It does not say actions have no consequences. It says consequences do not have to be the final word. Think about the power of that in your own life. How many times have you stood guilty of impatience, of pride, of poor decisions, and yet you were given another opportunity, another sunrise, another chance to make it right? That was mercy interrupting what you deserved. And when you understand that, when it truly settles in your spirit, it changes how you respond to others. Because you realize that if your life had been measured only by strict judgment, you would not be standing where you are today. Mercy interrupts judgment so that growth can begin. It steps between the hammer and the heart. It stands between the mistake and the destiny. It whispers, "There is more to your story than this moment." Justice may declare what is deserved, but mercy declares what is possible. And when mercy speaks, despair loses its authority, shame loosens its grip, and hope rises again. That is the interruption that changes destinies. That is mercy in motion. We are living in a generation that knows how to condemn, but has forgotten how to restore. One mistake, and you are labeled. One failure, and you are dismissed. One bad season, and people decide that is your permanent identity. Condemnation is quick. It is loud. It points its finger and steps back. It exposes flaws but offers no solution. It tears down but never rebuilds. And when condemnation finishes its work, all that remains are broken pieces and wounded hearts. But mercy does what condemnation never could. Mercy restores what condemnation destroys. When condemnation says, "You are finished," mercy says, "You are not done." When condemnation says, "You'll never recover," mercy says, "Watch what growth can do." When condemnation tries to bury someone under their past, mercy reaches down and lifts them into their future. Restoration is not denial of damage. Restoration acknowledges the damage and refuses to let it be permanent. Think about a building that has been shaken by a storm. Condemnation walks by, sees the cracks in the walls, and declares it unsafe. It walks away and leaves it abandoned, but mercy steps inside the wreckage. Mercy assesses the broken beams, the shattered windows, the weakened foundation, and begins the work of rebuilding. That is not weakness. That is courage, because restoration takes patience. Restoration takes vision. Restoration requires believing that something valuable still exists beneath the surface of failure. Mercy sees worth where others see waste. There are people who carry the weight of past mistakes like chains around their shoulders. They hear the echo of condemnation in their minds. "You'll never change, you'll never succeed, you'll never rise again." And if all they ever receive is judgment, they begin to believe it. But one act of mercy can silence years of shame. One voice that says, "I still believe in you," can reignite a fire that almost went out. One decision to forgive can give someone the courage to try again. Condemnation focuses on what was lost. Mercy focuses on what can be rebuilt. And here is the powerful truth. Restoration is always stronger than destruction. It takes far more strength to rebuild a life than to criticize one. It takes far more character to mend what is broken than to point out the cracks. Mercy does not ignore standards. It does not pretend that wrong choices have no impact, but it refuses to reduce a person to their worst moment. Because no one should be permanently defined by a temporary failure. Mercy restores dignity. It restores hope. It restores purpose. It looks at someone who has fallen and says, "Stand up. This is not where your story ends." When mercy moves, ruins become testimonies. Scars become reminders of survival. Broken places become foundations for wisdom. Condemnation leaves people in the dust. Mercy picks them up, and walks with them until they can stand on their own. And when restoration happens, when a life once counted out begins to flourish again, it sends a message louder than any judgment ever could. Failure does not have the final word. Mercy does. Hurt has a voice, and when you are wounded, that voice whispers, "Strike back." When you are betrayed, it says, "Make them feel what you felt." When you are insulted, it urges, "Return it with interest." That is the beginning of a cycle. Revenge feels powerful in the moment. It feels justified. It feels deserved. But revenge never travels alone. It multiplies. One harsh word births another. One act of retaliation sparks another reaction. And before long, what started as a single offense becomes a chain of bitterness stretching from heart to heart. Families have been divided for generations because no one chose mercy. Friendships have ended because pride refused to bend. Communities have fractured because retaliation became the language everyone spoke. This is how cycles are born. Anger produces anger. Hatred produces hatred. Wounds produce deeper wounds. But mercy breaks the chain. Mercy steps into the heat of offense and says, "It stops with me." It absorbs the impact and refuses to pass it on. It feels the pain, but chooses not to reproduce it. That is not natural. That is supernatural strength. Because everything within you may be demanding justice on your terms. Everything inside you may want vindication, recognition, apology. But mercy looks beyond the present emotion and sees the long-term consequence of revenge. Revenge keeps you connected to the offense. Mercy sets you free from it. When you choose retaliation, you stay tied to the person who hurt you. Your peace depends on their apology. Your joy depends on their regret. Your future becomes entangled with your past. But when you choose mercy, you cut the cord. You declare, "I will not allow this pain to control my destiny. I will not let this offense reproduce itself through me." It takes only one person to continue a cycle, but it also takes only one person to break it. One act of mercy can rewrite a family's story. One decision to forgive can alter the emotional climate of a home. One refusal to retaliate can silence an argument that could have escalated into permanent division. Mercy does not say the hurt was acceptable. It says the hurt will not have dominion. There is a profound strength in being the one who stops the escalation. When others expect you to lash out and you respond with calm, when others expect revenge and you offer restraint, when others expect bitterness and you demonstrate grace, that moment shifts everything because cycles depend on reaction. Remove the reaction and the cycle loses momentum. Remove retaliation and conflict begins to lose its fuel. Mercy disarms hostility. It confuses anger. It unsettles pride. It creates space where healing can begin. And here is the deeper truth. When you break the cycle externally, something breaks internally as well. The grip of resentment loosens. The weight of grudges lightens. The constant replay of the offense in your mind begins to fade. You cannot control what others choose, but you can control what flows through you. Let anger stop with you. Let bitterness stop with you. Let revenge stop with you. And when you do, you will discover something powerful. You did not just spare someone else from more pain. You spared yourself. That is the power of mercy to break what hatred tried to perpetuate. That is how chains fall. People will see the outburst, but they will not see the wound. They will hear the harsh words, but they will not hear the silent pain that produced them. They will react to the attitude, but they will never ask about the battle happening beneath the surface. Condemnation judges the behavior. Mercy searches for the heart. When someone lashes out, it is easy to label them difficult. When someone withdraws, it is easy to call them cold. When someone fails, it is easy to call them irresponsible. But mercy pauses long enough to ask a deeper question: what happened to you? because often behind anger is hurt. Behind arrogance is insecurity. Behind rebellion is disappointment. Behind harshness is hidden fear. Mercy does not excuse harmful behavior, but it seeks to understand the pain that fuels it. There are battles people fight that never make headline. Private disappointments, silent betrayals, unspoken grief, repeated rejection, and sometimes the behavior you encounter is simply the overflow of an unseen struggle. If you only respond to the surface, you will react with judgment. But if you look deeper, compassion begins to rise. Mercy sees beyond the moment. It recognizes that a person is more than a single action. It understands that a mistake is not the total measure of someone's identity. It looks past the rough edges and searches for the humanity underneath. And when you begin to see people that way, your response changes. Instead of asking, "How dare they?" you begin asking, "What are they carrying?" Instead of reacting with immediate offense, you respond with measured wisdom. Instead of escalating conflict, you create space for understanding. That does not mean you tolerate abuse. It does not mean you remove boundaries. Mercy and wisdom walk together. But even when you enforce limits, you can still carry compassion in your spirit. You can correct without cruelty. You can confront without contempt. You can stand firm without being hard-hearted. Mercy gives you eyes to see what others overlook. It reminds you that every person you encounter has a story you may never fully know. And if you had lived their experiences, faced their struggles, carried their disappointments, you might understand why they react the way they do. Perspective softens pride. When you realize how complex human hearts are, how layered emotions can be, how deeply experiences shape behavior, it becomes harder to reduce someone to a single label. Mercy says, "I will not define you by your worst day." And here is the transformative power of that mindset. When people feel understood, walls begin to lower. When people sense compassion, defenses weaken. When someone realizes they are seen as more than their mistake, they often rise to become better than their mistake. Mercy creates the atmosphere where growth becomes possible. It is easy to criticize from a distance. It takes strength to step close enough to understand. It is easy to react to offense. It takes character to look beyond it. And when you choose to see the heart behind the mistake, you reflect a higher level of maturity, a depth that refuses to live on the surface. Because mercy knows this truth, most people are not fighting you. They are fighting something within themselves. And sometimes, the greatest impact you can make is not in winning the argument, but in responding with compassion when judgment would have been easier. There is a prison that has no bars, no chains, no locked doors. And yet millions live inside it every single day. It is the prison of bitterness. When you are hurt, something tries to settle into your spirit, a replay of the offense, a memory that will not fade, a conversation you keep rehearsing in your mind. You tell yourself you are holding on because it matters. You tell yourself you cannot let it go because it was wrong. But what you do not realize is this: while you are holding the offense is holding you. Unforgiveness feels powerful at first. It feels like control. It feels like you are protecting yourself from being hurt again. But slowly, quietly, it begins to drain your peace. It steals your joy. It clouds your perspective. It hardens your heart, and the person you refuse to forgive may not even be thinking about it anymore. That is the deception. You believe you are imprisoning them in your resentment, but in reality, you are imprisoning yourself. Mercy unlocks the door. When you choose to forgive, you are not saying it didn't hurt. You are not saying it didn't matter. You are saying, I refuse to let this define me. I refuse to carry this weight into my future. Because bitterness is heavy. It affects how you speak. It affects how you trust. It affects how you see new opportunities. It even affects how you see yourself. Mercy lifts that weight. The moment you release someone from the debt you feel they owe you, something shifts inside your own spirit. The tension begins to ease. The constant replay begins to quiet. The tight grip around your heart begins to loosen. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is liberation, and here is the powerful truth. You can only give what you are willing to experience. If you live by strict judgment, you will always fear being judged. If you live by harshness, you will always expect harshness in return. But when you operate in mercy, you create an atmosphere of grace around your own life. You sow what you reap. When you extend mercy, you make room for mercy. When you forgive, you position yourself to receive forgiveness. When you release others, you free yourself from the emotional chains that were quietly shaping your future. There is freedom in mercy. Freedom from replaying the past, freedom from carrying resentment into new relationships, freedom from allowing someone else's mistake to control your emotions. And understand this, forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. It does not mean returning to unhealthy situations. It means releasing the internal grip of anger so that your heart can remain whole. You can set boundaries and still forgive. You can walk away and still show mercy. You can protect your peace and still refuse bitterness. Mercy frees the receiver, yes. It gives them another chance. It gives them space to grow. But often, the one who experiences the deepest freedom is the giver. Because when you let go of resentment, you take back control of your spirit. You are no longer reacting to the past. You are no longer chained to what was done. You are no longer defined by what hurt you. That is the power of mercy. It breaks invisible chains. It opens unseen doors. It restores internal peace. And when your heart is free, your future is no longer limited by your pain. That is freedom through mercy. The world measures greatness by visibility, titles, positions, influence. Applause, power displayed in public arenas where everyone can see who stands at the top. But heaven measures greatness differently. True character is not revealed when everything is easy. It is revealed when you have the advantage and you choose compassion. Anyone can be kind when there is nothing at stake. Anyone can be patient when they are not provoked. Anyone can speak gently when they have not been wounded. But when you have been wronged, when you have been misunderstood, when your name has been dragged through places it never should have been, and you still respond with mercy, that reveals who you really are. Mercy is the highest form of character because it requires maturity. It requires you to rise above ego. It requires you to silence pride. It requires you to value integrity more than vindication. There is something deeply powerful about a person who does not need to win every argument, about a person who does not need to prove every point, about a person who can stand secure enough in themselves that they do not crumble when criticized or explode when challenged. That is stability, that is depth, that is character forged through discipline. Mercy reflects inner strength that applause cannot create and opposition cannot destroy. It shows that your identity is not so fragile that it must defend itself at every attack. It shows that you are governed by principle, not impulse. When you choose mercy, you demonstrate control over your spirit. And control over your spirit is one of the greatest victories you will ever achieve. Because conquering circumstances is impressive, but conquering yourself is transformative, mercy says, "My values are not dependent on your behavior." It says, "I will not lower my standard because of your mistake." It says, "I choose who I become in this moment." That is greatness. The loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. The one who dominates the conversation is not always the most secure. Often, the strongest individual is the one who can remain composed when provoked, gracious when offended, steady when tested. Mercy reveals emotional intelligence. It reveals spiritual depth. It reveals a heart that understands its own need for grace and therefore extends grace to others. And here is what makes it so powerful. Mercy leaves a legacy. People may forget your accomplishments. They may forget your titles. They may even forget your victories, but they will remember how you treated them when they failed. They will remember whether you crushed them in their weakness or carried them through it. Character is not built in comfort. It is built in confrontation. It is built in those moments when your pride demands retaliation, but your principles demand restraint. When you consistently choose mercy, you cultivate respect that cannot be manufactured. You become someone others trust, someone others confide in, someone others look to for stability, because mercy communicates safety. It tells people, you can be human around me, you can grow around me, you can recover around me. And in a world where harshness is common and criticism is constant, that kind of character shines like a beacon. Mercy is not softness. It is disciplined strength wrapped in compassion. It is conviction guided by wisdom. It is authority expressed through grace. When you live that way, you reflect a higher standard, one that does not bend with trends or crumble under pressure. That is not just admirable, that is transformative character in action. So when all is said and done, when the arguments fade, when the emotions settle, when the moment of decision stands right in front of you, the question will not be how loud you were, how forceful you were, or how thoroughly you proved your point. The question will be this: did you choose mercy? Because every single day you will stand at a crossroads. On one side is pride, on one side is retaliation, on one side is the instinct to defend, to strike back, to make sure no one ever forgets what was done to you. On the other side stands mercy, mercy that requires courage, mercy that demands restraint, mercy that calls you higher than your emotions. And make no mistake, mercy will cost you something. It may cost you the satisfaction of revenge. It may cost you the applause of those who wanted you to fight back. It may cost you your pride, but what it gives you in return is far greater. It gives you peace that anger can never produce. It gives you freedom that bitterness can never allow. It gives you strength that retaliation can never match. Mercy does not change the past, but it transforms the future. When you walk in mercy, you become a barrier against hatred. You become a shield against division. You become a living testimony that power does not have to destroy. It can restore. And somewhere, someone who expected judgment will encounter grace instead. Someone who expected rejection will find compassion. Someone who believed their story was over will discover it is not finished. Because you chose mercy. Let the world chase dominance. Let others pursue revenge. Let pride demand its payment. But as for you, rise higher. Be strong enough to forgive. Be wise enough to restrain yourself. Be bold enough to restore. Stand in a generation that glorifies outrage, and prove that controlled strength is greater than uncontrolled emotion. In every conflict you choose mercy. In every offense, choose mercy. In every opportunity to retaliate, you choose mercy. Because in the end, mercy will outlast judgment, outshine revenge, and outlive every insult ever spoken. This is not weakness. This is power perfected. This is mercy.